Evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. We're delighted to welcome you to our third online session on the Bielski partisans. To recap, our first session was an introduction to the Museum of Jewish Resistance in Novogrudok. It was a story of its story, its artifacts, incredible tunnel escape from Novogrudok labor camp. And at that session, we heard incredible stories of some of the prisoners who escaped to the Bielski partisan camp. Our second session was Resistance and Survival with the Bielski in Naliboki forest, where we learned some of the history of the Bielski partisans' family detachment and had an opportunity to hear from dissidents whose parents survived with the Bielskis in the Naliboki forest. If you missed, by the way, if you missed those sessions, both of them recorded and available on our YouTube channel, so you can watch them. The title of today's session is Rediscovering Their Voices. More of that to come. For those of you who may have missed in early sessions, I would like to introduce to you a wonderful team who are working to bring the story of the Bielski partisan camp into focus and bring it to you. First of all, Tamara Vershitska, the Together Plans Jewish Heritage Specialist based in Novogrudok in Belarus. Welcome, Tamara. Shifra Pupko, Holocaust educator at Yad Vashem in Israel. Can't see you, Shifra, but I'm sure you're around. Welcome. Myself, my name is Artur Lifshitz. I'm a co-founder and country director of the Together Plan, and I'm based in Minsk in Belarus. And Debra Brunner, co-founder of the Together Plan, its CEO. She's based in London in the UK. So without further ado, I would like to now hand over to Debra in London. Debra?
Thanks, Artur. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes just telling you, orienting you to where you're at, if you haven't already been to our sessions, or if you have been to our sessions, just to remind you of who we are and what we're doing. So we are the Together Plan. We are members of an organization called the European, the AEPJ, who are part of the Council of Europe, the European Association for the Preservation and Promotion of Jewish Heritage and Culture, and they're based in Barcelona. And they are the organization who are building a Jewish cultural heritage route across Europe. And we are the partner who are working on the part of the Europe that is in Belarus. So it's quite a responsibility. And of course, the Bielski partisan story is a big part of that. Just to give you a little idea of one of the principles behind cultural heritage, so we call it the right to cultural heritage, in that cultural heritage represents a basis to cooperation, democratic debate and participation, as well as openness between cultures. The fact that we are in this network across the whole of Europe enables us to collaborate and have conversation with other networkers and other route builders across Europe. The innovative approach of the Council of Europe's Pharaoh Convention, this is a principle, came into force in 2011, and it's very important to the work that we're doing. And it concerns, in particular, the fact that heritage policies have to be adapted to the needs of society, human progress, and quality of life. And with what's going on in the world at the moment, this is more important now more than ever before. And the Pharaoh Convention introduces a key concept stating that everyone, alone or collectively, has the right to benefit from cultural heritage and to contribute towards its enrichment. And that's really important in the work that we are doing. So just to tell you that we believe that on these very principles, that sustainable Jewish community development in post-Soviet countries will have positive outcomes in programs that are rooted in cultural heritage. And this is why we believe that telling stories, real stories, is vital. So let's talk about those stories. Everyone's got a story. And this particular project around the Bielskis, it has many stories to be told. Some are already known, some are already out there in museums, known to you personally, But what we're trying to do is pull them all into one place. We want to create a repository of these stories. We can start having a much more, we can dig deeper into this history, learn more about it, and create much more of an interest. It's difficult when these stories are alone in one place. When you put them together, it's much more powerful. So there are stories, we know some of them, but we're trying to find more. And what we're trying to do is invite you and people who aren't here, who we're trying to connect to tell us their stories, to send us their stories, so that we can start building this repository. These are just some of them, but we know there are more. So how do you send us the stories? Well, we have something called a story bank at the Together Plan. You can get to it through our website on the contact part of our website. It's a drop down and it's very easy. You can literally just fill in a form, upload any photographs, any documentation, and tell us the story, and we will be in the right place. This is an open story bank as much. It's not specific to the Bielskis, but what we'll do is, if it says you're a Bielski contact, we will collect and collate it into the right part of our library. If anybody has trouble uploading information or doing it through the portal, it doesn't matter. You can always just email us or email Tamara, who is our sort of central point for the Bielskis stories, and email it to her. It will still end up in the right place. But this is just one part in the journey of the work that we're going to be doing around the Bielskis and memorialization of the partisan camp. So I am now going to pass over to Tamara, who is going to introduce the first of our guest speakers. Over to you.
Thank you, Debra. You still share your screen, by the way?
Stop sharing. There you go.
Yes, thank you. I guess, dear speakers, dear friends, welcome to the third meeting. And the idea, your contribution to the yet to be Bielski Memorial begins today. The idea of this memorial, which we are planning, is to give voice to each of 1,000 and more than 200 Bielski partisans. And I'm happy to give word to our first speaker, who is Dr. Irvin Shalu, Shelubski, who was born to Myra and Nochim Shelubski in a DP camp in Salzburg, Austria, after World War II. His parents immigrated to the United States in January 1949 and changed their names to Myra and Norman Shelub. Irwin is the eldest of their 3 children. He has a sister Elaine and brother Mark. He's currently a retired physician who formerly practiced pulmonary medicine, lung diseases, and critical care medicine. Now Irvin lives on a ranch in Central California with his wife Sharon, and they harvest olive trees on the ranch. His parents, Myra and Nochim Shelubski, met and became life companions as Jewish partisans, first in the Lipichansky forest and then Nalibuki forest. His mother, Myra, was born and raised in Ze'ev, which is now called Zatlava. His father, Nochim, was born and raised in Novogrudok, Novogrudok. They became members of the special Orjunikidze detachment in the Kirov Brigade in 1943. Orjunikidze detachment was the name of a fighting group of Bielski partisans. In the detachment, Nochim Shelubski was a company commander and had approximately from 30 to 40 Jewish fighters under him, organized in 2 platoons and 4 sections. Myra, his steadfast companion, who supported him throughout these most trying times of combat missions and warfare, has just turned 100. It's our privilege and honor to celebrate Bielski partisans Myra and Norman Shelub. I'm giving the floor to their son, Irvin Shalu. Please.
Thank you, Tamara. Thank you for your kind introduction. And it is indeed a privilege to address my fellow Bielski partisan descendants. Let me now introduce my mother, who we celebrate this year in a very, very special time, her 100th birthday. Here I am, and here is Mira. Now she is Myra Shelub, then she was Mira Raznov. She was a Bielski partisan. She was a member of the Ordzhonikidze Detachment, along with my father, her husband, now deceased, Noam Shelubsky, who was a commandir roti, as you just heard. A commandir roti where he had under him approximately 50 Jewish partisan fighting soldiers. Their story, or at least part of their story, I would like to tell you at this time. It was in June of 1941, 2 years after the start of World War II, or approximately thereof, that the 19-year-old, next slide, please, Debra, Mira Shelubsky, then Mira Raznov, and next slide, the 21-year-old Noam Shelubsky had to endure a dramatic and drastic change in their lives. They were young, ambitious Jewish students. Mira from Shtetl, Noam from Novogrudok. But now their lives were changed forever, because in June 1941, on the 22nd day, Hitler and Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the Blitzkrieg campaign to conquer Russia. 3 million foot soldiers marched swiftly to the Eastern Front. They were supported by over 10,000 armored vehicles. Needless to say that in a few days, not only had the Soviet troops and authority withdrawn and retreated, but Poland was overrun. Then it was Poland, now it's Belarus. And then the catastrophe began. For Mira in Shtetl, she now had to wear, along with her family, yellow badges. They were ordered to surrender all their valuables, and the SS restricted them to a ghetto. They had engaged and were engaged in forced labor. For Noam in Novogrudok, it was now the 3rd week of July 41, and he was on a list of 52 of 100. Those 100 were gathered, but the 52 were listed as potential organizers and leaders. The SS had Noam on that list. And so they sent guards to Noam's father's house. His father was named Yitzhak, in the middle of Novogrudok on the 3rd of May Street. And there they knocked on the door. And my grandfather, Noam's father, answered. He opened the door. They demanded he present Noam. He paused. Then he said, Ich bin Noam. I am Noam. And so my grandfather, Noam's father, was taken instead of his son and brought to the village square with the other 52, and they're all murdered. Nochem escaped to the woods, somehow managing to endure what had happened to his father. He wandered in the woods, and there he met some Russian soldiers who were remnants of the retreating Russian army. They began small groups of partisan resistance fighters. And so he also met escapees from Novogrudok and also from Ze'ev. And they congregated into loosely organized partisan fighters. It was now 1942, months later, and in August, the SS had eliminated and had tried to exterminate so many of the ghettos and so many of the Jews of the Jewish community in northeastern Poland, now Belarus. Sarah, my aunt, Mira's sister, and Mira escaped from that liquidation and went to the camp in Dvorets. But later on, within a few weeks, they decided that to survive, they would escape into the woods, into the Lipchansky woods, and join a resistance group, the Jewish resistance group, the Kaplinskis. And there, in the latter portion of 42, was also Nochem. He had joined the Kaplinskis, and now they were an organized Jewish resistance fighting group. But they had a problem. The Nazis had had enough of the resistance fighters in the Lubchansky Pushka, the forest. They launched the Oblava, an attempt to completely eliminate all the resistance. And not only that, but now they were meeting increasing anti-Semitism among other Russian partisans. Kaplinsky was killed in one of the actions during the Oblava. And then the Kaplinsky brigade, with my father and my mother, Nochem and Mira, joined the Orlanskis, headed by Kolya, the Russian general, who himself had anti-Semitic tendencies. And those anti-Semitic tendencies were played out by his Estonian, by his Ukrainian, and some Polish nationalists that had joined his group. They turned against the Jewish partisans in the group. And so by the spring of 1943, it was evident to my father and his comrades, Jewish partisan fighters, that they could not survive. It was too dangerous in the Lubchansky Pushka. They decided they would march to the Nalaboki forest. My father from Novogrudok had heard of the Bielski brothers from Stankovic. He knew of them, and he knew what they were doing in the Nalaboki forest. And so 25 Jewish fighters with their companions, known as the Forest Boys, led by Nochem, then began their march to the northeast, 60 miles over treacherous territory in extenuating circumstances, hunted by the Germans, hunted, in fact, by some of the Russian anti-Semites. And midway in their march, at Sturahata, they met Tuvia Bielski. He had known that they were coming. He had learned that they had planned to join his group and to seek the protection of his group and to fight on with his resistance fighters. But he had bad news. His news was that the Forest Boys, they had all been labeled by Kolya bandits, outlaws. They were to be rounded up. They were to be eliminated, wiped out. Tuvia explained he could not receive them at the camp in the Nalaboki. His family camp, which now had hundreds of Jewish refugees, would be endangered if they came. In fact, his relationship, which was growing in cooperation with the Russian underground, the Russian resistance fighters, would be jeopardized. But Tuvia Bielski did not reject them. He did not abandon them. Tuvia Bielski said, let's find a way. So he guided them to meet the regional commander, General Platon, guided and assisted by Tuvia Bielski, a delegation of 4 of the forest boys, headed by my father Nochem, met Platon. He was not sympathetic. He did not agree with their pleadings to join the Bielski partisans. And then one of the 4 pulled out a gold watch, a family heirloom that he had carried in memory of his family and their valuables. He gave the watch to General Platon. The general's mood changed. His attitude altered. He then said, I will legalize you if you agree to join the now organized and beginnings of another special detachment called the Ordzhonikidze. The Ordzhonikidze was part of 4 brigades that he commanded. It was the part of the Kirov brigade. And this detachment was now commanded by Lyashenko. But the deputy commander who helped organize the detachment was a man by the name of Zush Bielski, who also commanded a company, a special company dedicated to reconnaissance, information that was necessary to know where the enemy was and to generate actions against them. They agreed. The forest boys joined the Ordzhonikidze. And my father, Nochem, with his companion, my mother, Mira, began their resistance fighting again, now in the Nalaboki. At first, he was a commander's vod, commander of approximately 20 Jewish soldiers in 1 platoon and 2 sections. And then by December of 43, he was promoted to commander Roti, 50 soldiers in 2 platoons, each platoon with 2 sections. And they executed under his leadership actions. They were given combat orders. And in collaboration with Zush, they attacked the German army. They blew up bridges. They mined railroad trains and railroad tracks. They attacked stations. They prevented the German army from transporting supplies, armaments, as well as new recruits to the Eastern Front. They did all this and at the same time completed economic missions at the request of Tuvia to provide food and supplies to the camp, the family camp in the Nalaboki. And week after week, action after action, they increased their success and their effect until August of 1944, when finally the day had come. The Germans were in retreat and the Soviet army arrived, liberating them and liberating the Bielski camp. So here they are in the next slide. In those years, after the war. Here they are, Mira, Nochem, her sister, Sarah, her brother, Moshe. Sarah and Moshe also survived because Tuvia was willing to accept them in the family camp. And now they were united here in Bad Gastein, outside of Salzburg, Austria, in a DP camp. And at the next slide, this is how they looked a few years later, readying themselves for immigration to the United States. But before that immigration, at the next slide, Mira celebrated the beginning of the fulfillment of what Nochem and Mira had committed as life companions to do: replenish their heritage, renew it, and rebuild the family that they had lost. And here is their first son. And in the next slide, Nochem celebrating his son, the son that he named and his companion Mira named Yitzhak. Yitzhak named after Nochem's father, my grandfather. And in the United States, after immigration, they further succeeded. They further built their family. They came to San Francisco, California, where Nochem had some longtime uncles and aunts who had immigrated before the war. And they built a family, and the family built a further family. And in the next slide, you now see the family that in 2001 came with their Bielski partisan ancestor, Mira, to visit Belarus, facilitated by somebody named Tamara. And Tamara Vereshitskaya's wonderful staff at the Novogrudok Museum, bringing them to Shelub. And here they pose in front of the sign, Shelub, the town that gave the family the name of Shelub, the town that was the birthplace and where Yitzhak, Nochem's father, was raised. And there they learned from the Bielski partisan, Mira, what had happened. Here is my wife, Sharon, next to Mira. Mira's grandsons, Aaron and Nathan. And then her three sons and daughter, the three children, Nochem's children, my sister Elaine, Yitzhak, now called Irwin, and Mark. Next slide. And here we are today. My wife Cheryl and me celebrating Mira on her 100th birthday. A Bielski partisan of the Ordnungskitska detachment, then, now, and always. And in the next slide, her recollections. The book that she wrote with her co-author, Fred Rosenbaum. The book entitled Never the Last Road, A Partisan's Life, detailing her experience and the experience of her beloved husband, Nochem, now called Norman. This title, Never the Last Road, was derived from the famous poem written by Hirsch Glick in 1943 in the Vilna ghetto. That became the song and the hymn of the partisans. It communicated and expressed the spirit of these partisan resistance fighters. In Yiddish, it is known as Sag nicht kein Mal aus dem Geist der letzte Weg. Never say this is the last road. And the first stanza, translated from the Yiddish into English, goes as follows. Don't ever say that you are on your final way. Those skies of lead obscured the sunny days. The hour we've waited for so long is drawing near, when our steps will thunder out. We are here. Mir seinen do. And on the next slide, as Mira, the Bielski partisan fighter, bids us farewell, it reminds us that indeed we are here. Because of them, to remember them, and to honor them. We are their descendants, their ongoing triumph of life, of Jewish life, made possible by their indomitable spirit, generated by their brilliant and valiant courage. We are here, the descendants of the remarkable Bielski partisans.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Irvin, for this explicit story of your parents. I know there are many more stories you can tell about them in the forest, but let's leave it for the questions. I believe that people will have questions, particular questions about life in the forest. And now I would like to give word to our next speaker, who is Dr. Ze'ev Sharon. And he was born in 1948 in ADP camp, post-war Germany, to parents who survived the war in the USSR, in the Urals. His mother and her small family escaped from Kamenka, a small village in Grodno region, pretty far from Novogrudok. His father volunteered to the Red Army, was wounded in Smolensk, and was in a timber factory in the Urals during the war. After the war in 1949, they immigrated to Israel. Ze'ev served 3 years in the 13th Battalion in the Golani Infantry Brigade. He wrote 2 books on events in Golani and is in the middle of writing about the 13th Battalion during the 3 years of war of attrition. Among his hobbies is family research. And he prepares materials for a book on his own family and their shtetl in Belarus. Today, Ze'ev will tell the story of his uncle, Gedalia Toker, a Bielski partisan and a fighter. The floor is yours, Ze'ev, please.
Yeah, first I must say that I'm excited for 2 reasons mainly. One is that I'm not a talker in general, and secondly is that English is not my language. But I'll say a word or story about myself. My name is Ze'ev. Sharon, it was Kozakovsky when we arrived to Israel, my father's surname. And they lived, as Tamara said, both. They were neighbors in Kaminka, which was called before that Kamionka when it was in Poland. About my uncle, I've never met him. I never met Gedalia, never talked with him. Neither did I meet Rachel, Raya, his future wife, who was sister of my mother. I never met them. And most of the stories are outcome of a research in which even Tamara helped me a lot, I guess. In this way, I tried to get into the footprints of Gedalia step by step if I could, and I guess I did some of it. So the Toker family, we pronounce it Toker, comes from Zeludok. Gedalia was born in 1925. Parents Naftali and Gita Leah, sister Heshke, and there were three other families in Zeludok, all but Gedalia passed in the Holocaust. Zeludok from Pinkasa Kehilot, Poland, it says that it lies between Grodno and Novogrudok on the Neyman River in the Zlotchenka and the Zlotchenka, sorry for the pronunciation, river. On May 8, 42, the ghetto was surrounded by large forces of SS men, German gendarmes, and Lithuanian police. The next day, May 9th, over 1,000 Jewish people from Zeludok and Orla, or Lava, were taken to a pre-prepared pits a few hundred meters from the town, the village. In about 2 hours, everyone was murdered, including Gedalia's family. Gedalia survived the massacre. He was among 140 young men the Germans had gathered for work at the Skribovo train station a week before the massacre. Afterwards, he was sent with all the others to Lida. In the Lida ghetto, he was with Baruch Levin, who wrote, in a way he wrote it, who wrote a book in which he refers to Gedalia. They worked in the Gebist Commissioner workshops in the ghetto, and at the same time they also gathered and repaired weapons to prepare to live to the forests. For Gedalia, as much as I know and read, the Partizanka had already begun in the Lida ghetto. There are stories, I'm not going to get into them, but there is a story about him trying to escape in a German vehicle. Okay, I'll make it shorter. From the book Revolt and the Partisan War, about 500 Jews fled Lida ghetto into the forest. Quite a significant number, I guess. About 300 of them came to the partisan units, and I know from Tamara that many or most of them joined the Bielskis. The rest just led partisan life in groups near the partisans. From the same book, I can quote, among the first to go to the forest was Baruch Levin. He was a very known partisan. He requires a story for himself, a big one. In the fall of 1942, two armed partisans, Shaul Shechnovich and Natan Funt, came to Lida to take a group of Jews to the forest, provided they each had a rifle. Among them was Gedalia Toker. There were others, Binyamin Baran and Dr. Miasnik with his wife and little daughter. Baruch Levin in his book says, in front of me was my brother-in-law, Shaul Shechnovich, my wife's brother. He said, we are here to take you to the forest. Baruch hurried to recruit more young people. They were allowed 11 for the escape. The condition was that they would immediately agree to join him and would not ask for time to consult their families. Gedalia Toker, he writes, was the first to say, I'm coming, and he came with the rifle with him. In September or November 1942, Gedalia escaped from Lida ghetto to the forest. He was 17 years old. We know about 3 battalions Gedalia was in. Perhaps he was, it is possible that Gedalia was in Borba or Triad for a while. One reason is that Nathan Funt, which I met at his home, he had a Pepe Dar machine gun in his salon on the wall. He came to Israel with a partisan weapon. He was from Borba, like many other Jews from Jetl, which he was one of them. Tamara found in NARB archive in NARB in Minsk that on September 25, 1942, Gedalia Toker joined Detachment Borba in the Ninskaya Brigade, which the Bielskis, were also part of this brigade until 43, so she said. Moshe Toker, son of Gedalia, is now in Israel since the Aliyah in 1991. Is mostly sure that his father Gedalia arrived at the Iskra fighting partisan brigade. Iskra was fighting and moving. They didn't have a steady camp. Yasha Mazowiecki was one of the Iskra. He didn't remember any Gedalia there. But I met Ignaz Feldon, and he was with his brother in the Iskra partisan platoon or triad. And he says he remembers differently. Gedalia was in our triad, Iskra, he said. Could be that they were just for a short time, like in transition. Next time I meet Gedalia Toker, he's now in the fighting partisan battalion that has been separated from the Bielski partisans or Genikidze, which you already heard about, and I'm not going to repeat any. We have many stories, not many, we have quite a few stories about Gedalia and the Bielski and or Genikidze or triad. Like he had a horse, he was horse riding, which was trained to stay motionless, to lie motionless, to serve as shelter for its rider during a battle. Like another one that he returned 12 times to Lida ghetto to take out Jews to the forests. Like Rochelle Rothschild, member of my family, who met Gedalia, I did not, but she met him. She came from the States several times to Belarus to meet him. She told me that he told her that they raided the German position so surprisingly that the food was still hot on the table. But I want to tell you about one story in particular. In the book, The Jewish Partisans, I mention books because the name of Toker Gedalia appears in like about 10 books. He's an unknown person. He was just a soldier or a fighter or a partisan, but still his name appears here and there when you look for it. In the book of the partisans, they say it's written that as the Red Army approached the White Poles, which was called Armia Krajova, intensified their operations against the Russians and the Jewish partisans. They fought the Germans and the Russians and the Jews all together. One of the first battles against the White Poles took place in a village called Olchovka, in the area of the Russian partisans beyond the Neman River. The White Poles emerged in true columns. This I read from Memories of Zosya Bielski in another book. They came in 3 columns. One of them penetrated the village. They gathered the population in order to kill all of them because of suspicion. They were suspicious of helping the partisans. At this time, the partisan units from Kirov Brigade broke into the village to fight against the Poles. Even the warriors of Orgenikidze had a considerable part in this difficult battle, which included face-to-face combat using knives even. The Jewish company had a lot of casualties. Gedalia Toker, it's written, who saw himself surrounded, shot himself in the throat. He was wounded in the mouth. The Poles thought he was dead, but the partisans picked him up to the hospital and he recovered. Moshe Toker, his son, recalls that Gedalia was there at the same time with a friend by the name of Zussman. Zussman was wounded. A bullet penetrated his nose and he lost a lot of blood. Gedalia carried him on his back towards the forest in order to save both of their lives. Zussman wanted them both to commit suicide so they would not be captured by the White Poles, and took out an anti-tank grenade, pulled out the safety and wanted to blow it between them. Gedalia stopped him and threw the grenade to the Poles coming towards them. He told Zussman, there is another 200 meters to the forest, maybe we'll make it. In the ongoing exchange of fire, Zussman was hit again by a bullet and died. Gedalia saw that he was surrounded with no chance of escape, so he did what partisans do in such a situation. He kept one last bullet in his rifle for himself. He pressed the rifle into his chin so that the bullet would pass through the chin into the head. However, the bullet crushed his jaw but missed the head. About 27 partisans died in this action and about 50 White Poles fell in the battle. So by now, Gedalia is rescued. And again, I come back to Ignaz Feldon, whom I met, and he really enjoyed partisan life. He said, I had a horse, I had nice clothes, good food. He was in Iskra, not in Bielski. In the evening, he says, farmers told us that in a pit near the forest, there is someone of your men, a partisan. There they found Zussman dead and Toker alive. All his teeth were out, he said. Dr. Gordon of the partisans bandaged him. Ignaz and Abrasha Arlok put Gedalia on a horse-drawn sleigh, even though there was no snow at the time, in order to reduce the suffering from road bumps. Along with him, they took also a wounded lieutenant, and they drove into the partisan hospital, which was hidden in the woods. So by now, Gedalia, if I again go into his footsteps, Gedalia was saved, and now his condition was so bad that he has to be sent back to the rear. There was an aerodrome in the woods at that time, and the Russian airplanes came and brought ammunition and commanders and so on, radio people, and returned with casualties. Ignaz Feldon tells that after rescuing Gedalia from Orchovka, we drove him to the partisan aerodrome in the Pushcha, which was about 80 kilometers away from us. Ignaz and Gedalia put Gedalia on a plane, and he wanted to join him, but at last he stayed behind, so he won't be considered as a deserter. The book Defiance writes about the same story, a little bit different. There is the evidence of Luba Rudnitsky, who tells Nechama Tek, Janek was wounded, I quote, in the leg in an encounter with the Germans, and the couple came to the Bielskis camp for treatment. At the same time, another wounded Jewish partisan, Gedalia Toker, was brought there. His mouth was torn, and he was fed cream and butter with a straw. Someone had to take care of him. When I arrived, at the aerodrome, there were a lot of casualties all over the field, and the officers there said that this time they are taking only wounded in their legs. The others will have to stay behind. So she put a sheet of white sheet on his leg. She lifted him, I quote, I lifted him in my arms and screamed, move aside, the wounded man cannot walk. And I pushed myself up, brought him there, and left him on the plane, and he survived. Tamara found out.
I'm sorry, I have to remind you about time.
Yeah, a few lines. In May 1942, the 3 wounded Kirov brigade were sent to the rear, among them Gedalia Toker. Ignaz Feldon remembered that about 3 months after Toker was sent to the hospital, he returned to the forest. And Hamatek wrote, indeed, the wounded partisan researched for Luba after the war, found her and thanked her for saving him. So the finale is that for me and Gedalia, that every year afterwards, the Shelub Jews on May, the day of liberation, went to the forest and they sang victory. So they sang, Yiddish songs and folk songs and partisan songs. And Gedalia, and the singing was led by Gedalia, who had a good voice. So here ends, Tamara, my story of Gedalia, my uncle, whom I never met. He died on March 1988 and is buried in Shchuchin in Belarus. He was decorated with 2 medals. Thank you.
A remarkable partisan and wonderful research you did on your uncle. And I must say that the story of Gedalia gives so much information about how Jews from the Lider ghetto reached the Bielski partisans. You mentioned about 300 Jews from the Lider ghetto. That's true, who joined the Bielskis. And indeed, Iskra, Detachment Iskra, was a liaison between the Lider ghetto and the Bielskis. And they smuggled many Jews from the Lider out of the Lider ghetto to the forest, and then led to the Bielskis. And that's the story is unique. The story of Gedalia is unique because not many who were wounded in the forest managed to be sent by planes to the rear, to the Soviet rear, to be treated there. And the battle in Olchovka with so many details, I would like to get information from you about all the sources you used for your research. Thank you very much. There may be questions at the end from others. And now I'm happy to give word to Alissa Sklar, who is the granddaughter of Shelub and Hannah Rybak. Shelub and Hannah Rybak were part of the tunnel escape from Novogrudok ghetto and members of the Bielski brigade until liberation in 1944. Alissa lives in Montreal, Canada, with her husband, 3 daughters, and parents. She is a vice president of marketing for an economic development software company owned by the Financial Times. Alissa, her youngest daughter, and her mother, Sylvia, regularly speak to community organizations about Jewish resistance during the Holocaust. Her mother, Sylvia, or Tzipora, her Jewish name, and her twin brother, Amizur Haimi, were born in a DP camp, Castel Gandolfo, Ascoli Piceno, Italy, on May 27, 1946. I know Sylvia is in Italy now, and she wanted to join us tonight. Maybe she is with us. Alissa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I really am enjoying listening to all these stories so much. This is really such a special opportunity, and I appreciate you inviting me to be part of this. What I've done here is put together a very short version of a presentation that I've done with my mom, who is obviously the daughter of my grandparents, Shlomo and Hannah Rybak, and one of my 3 daughters, Maya Hilcoat, their great-granddaughter, who is 18 years old. This is something that we've done for the past few years, actually inspired by our visit to the reunion that Tamara and the museum organized in 2019, right before the world changed completely. And we are so, so grateful. We've spoken to many community organizations, synagogues, schools, and we really are very passionate about the importance of sharing this information with the next generation. It's really one of the things that we like to do. So what I'm just going to do is tell a little bit about my grandparents' story. And I like to actually start with this picture. So this is not a picture of my uncle Ephraim. It's actually a picture of my brother, Jamie. And the reason it's not a picture of my uncle Ephraim is because we don't have any pictures of Ephraim. He died somewhere around 2 years old. We don't have a single image of him. We don't know his birth date for sure. We don't know exactly the date that he died. My brother Jamie is named for him. His Hebrew name is Ephraim. And there's obviously so many people who are lost, whose names never get spoken, whose don't have any images that we can continue to share. But I like to dedicate this to him to keep his memory alive. So part of what I like to do when I tell this story is just to spend a little bit of time talking about my grandparents of blessed memory. My grandfather was a gentleman. He literally, he was a scholar. He was the headmaster at the school in Novogrudok. He was originally born in Rodin. He was one of the foremost Hebrew grammarians of his time, went on to be a school principal at Herzliya school here in Montreal that my mother and my uncle went to, that I went to, my brother to. And taught bar mitzvah lessons and just was really, he was not a fighter at all, and circumstances obviously changed his life and he contributed as he could. My grandmother Hannah Reback was born the daughter of a tailor furrier. She also was definitely not a fighter, but she rose to the challenges of the time that she had. I was very close to my grandparents growing up. They didn't talk very much about their experiences. I had this vague idea of them living in the forest. We have a cottage north of Montreal that was a very special place for my grandparents. As soon as when they moved here, they used to take the milk truck up with my grandmother, my mother and my uncle, they're twins. It was very special and important to them to be in that space. My grandfather could name every nut and berry and tree. He used to make choke cherry wine. Nothing was ever wasted. He could rig up a cradle with some pieces of wood and some wire hangers. Like that experience really changed him. I learned a lot more about their lives when we went back to the reunion. Obviously, my grandparents had passed away at that point, and I started to put back together some of the pieces of their story, and I'm just really, really grateful for that opportunity. So just a few things about them. My grandparents, as I said, were from my grandfather from Rodin. My grandmother was born in Novogrudok. Some pictures of them. These are friends of theirs. We've lost their names, but this is right before the war. My grandparents was a couple on the left. This is my grandfather with a group of people, I don't know their names, riding bicycles in the area with a tie. I love that. He was very proper gentleman always. My grandmother is on the right-hand side. This is also a picture from before the war, with friends out in the forest. They lived a good life in Novogrudok. It was a really important center of Jewish life and learning and culture. And this was a really good place for them until the war happened. And so what we try and do is kind of bear witness in different ways, as so many of us as part of this call are. Things changed obviously very dramatically in June 1941, the Nazis invaded. There was no internet obviously, and they didn't get a lot of news, so they didn't know until they actually started rolling through town. I think actually of the first speaker, I think it was Irwin, was talking about actually the story of the blood on the stones. Our cousin, Ray Kushner, who was 16 years old at the time, gives some testimony in a published work. And I just want to read very briefly what she writes here. One Saturday, the Germans asked the Judenrat to gather 50 nice-looking young girls to work. In spite of their fear, they had to obey. Their mothers were crying, terrified for their daughters, but they had no choice. The Germans took the girls to the town square. This is an image of the square as it looks today, where there was music being played by a small orchestra. They had gathered 150 Jewish lawyers, professors, artists, and writers. The soldiers shot them as the music was playing. The blood was running on the stones of the square. The 50 girls were required to wash the blood from the stones. They helped put the dead bodies on the wagon. The heads of the people were hanging off the back of the wagon. We knew these people. The music continued to play as we washed the blood off the stones. The Germans were laughing and dancing in the square. And this is an image of the house that my grandmother and her family lived in. This one over here, you see the open window at the top floor. The square is just down the street over there. My grandmother's brother, Mutel, was one of the men who were called to the square. The whole family, including my grandmother, watched from this upper window, which is still standing, at least it was in 2019. My grandfather, I guess it was my great uncle, put on his uniform. He had served, I guess, in the army. He combed his hair and he walked to the square and was shot as the whole family watched on. So it was kind of amazing, having heard this story, to see the space where all of this played out. So like everyone else in the region, they were ordered to the courtyard at the courthouse. So this is just outside of the museum. There's a picture that we took when we were there. To imagine thousands of families huddled in December weather. They were given no food, no drink, no shelter. There was no room except to stand. My grandparents recalled this until the ghetto was prepared for them. And then they were marched up the hill to the ghetto. And my grandmother talked about walking up the hill. And so it was really remarkable for us to be in that place and see where they actually were led when they went to that place. Now, the museum it was also this really kind of exceptional place. This was just stories for us until we went and we saw the place where all of these things happened. And I'm going to read another testimony from our cousin Ray from her book, The Miracle of Life, from 1942. The Germans came at 4 a.m. They woke everyone up with an announcement that they were going to take the small children to a special kindergarten. I will never forget the memories of the mothers and fathers kneeling on their hands and knees, begging to save their children. Sure enough, 3 days later, the Germans returned with German shepherds. The dogs sniffed out the hidden children. The soldiers picked up the small ones and threw them against the wall of the building. They also threw some high up in the air for target practice. It's impossible to imagine the crying and screaming of the parents. And this was the end of Jewish children in the ghetto. So actually, there were some children that remained hidden. One of them was my uncle Ephraim, who was a toddler. My grandmother worked as a nurse. I guess she had a little bit of training at that point. And they were able to save some morphine. And so they hid some of the children that managed to escape this, but they had gotten some intelligence that the Germans were going to be coming to liquidate them. My grandfather, my Zaidi Shlomo, was sent out of the ghetto on a forced work detail when this intelligence came in. And so my grandmother and her sister Mirke, who was also lost, they had gathered some of their children and euthanized them. They put their children to sleep with morphine that they'd been able to save. And my grandfather was obviously very, very upset about this story. When he came back, he was devastated, but there really was no choice given to them. They didn't want to put them through what they'd seen the other children happen. So this was something they didn't really talk about for the rest of their lives, but we like to dedicate this to his memory. And in fact, this is the model of the museum. You could see the work ghetto in the back. That's the courtyard that I showed you before. And actually, we were really touched to see that in the museum, there is a bunk with my grandparents' names and I guess the name of their baby, who would have been lost before the work ghetto. There were no children in the work ghetto. So that is really just the idea that there's some memory. So we know actually that my grandparents were part of the last group of people who survived the massacres because they had skills that were useful to the Germans, and they were in the workshops, and that's when they decided to escape. This kind of desperate measure, as we see with world events playing out everywhere, this decision, do we leave, do we stay, do we fight, do we escape? You don't know the end of the story at the time. That's what's so terrifying about them. My grandparents were part of the brave group of people who dug the tunnel out of the ghetto into the forest. And that was really important time for them. My grandfather were called helping sew bags. One of the biggest problems with the tunnel is, what do you do with all the dirt? How do you hide that from the Germans? And he recalled, he was very good with his hands, sewing bags that they used to be able to bring sawdust in from the workshops to keep the floor of the tunnel dry, but then also to remove the dirt, hide it under the boards, hide it in the latrines, just anything that they could do to keep the Germans from noticing what actually was going on at the time. Now, when they got out of the tunnel, so they went through, my grandmother also like panicked, and she was claustrophobic for the rest of her life. The tunnel, I think, was only 26 by 26 inches, maybe 27 by 27 inches, very small. My grandmother had a horror of small spaces for the rest of her life and almost couldn't go. And so my grandfather, who was a very gentle, quiet, patient man, talked about how he actually tied a guy using a belt or a rope from his waist to her waist to help to reassure her to take her out. When they emerged from the tunnel that night in the dark, they knew that if they all stayed together, there was a higher chance that everybody would be caught. So my great-grandparents were part of a group of about 20 other people. And they knew that the partisans, the Bielskis, were in the Nalibaki forest and also in the Lubch forest, and they were going to be looking for them. But they had to make their way over those kilometers to the woods. So they actually were helped by a Polish farmer named Yarmolowicz, who they had heard was going to be willing to help them. And he took them to his barn and his granary, and he was hiding some other Jews. My grandfather's foot had been wounded when they got out of the tunnel, but Yarmolowicz brought some cotton and managed to, clean and bind up my grandfather's wound. My grandparents were kosher their entire life, but they were starving. And this farmer made a unkosher bucket of soup with potatoes, onions, lard. And my grandfather gratefully accepted it and said it was the best soup he ever had in his entire life. When they couldn't really stay with this farmer because he knew that his farm hands were spying for the Germans. So he pointed them in the direction of the Bielski Atriad and warned them that if they were going to survive, they had to learn how to act like partisans. So he led them to a house and gave them some guns carved out of wood that obviously were just pieces of wood and not actually guns. And he said, invite and pretend like you're a real partisan. And they went to see if they could get food from the neighboring farms. Eventually, another sympathetic Polish farmer directed them where he knew the partisans were going to be passing by, and they waited and they heard a wagon full of Jewish partisans singing songs, and they knew they'd finally found the Bielskis. My grandfather describes what it was like to come to the camp and see Bielski up on a white horse with a gun. And he said after all the years of terror and humiliation and loss and grief, it was like a miracle to see this free Jew on a horse with a gun. He said he will never, ever forget that. They were brought to a temporary infirmary that had been set up to care for the ghetto escapees, also made to make sure, we are all familiar with quarantine, that they didn't have typhoid that they would bring into the camp. And they spent time in that underground bunker, the Zemlyanka. And then they were able to join the rest of the group. Now, in the partisans, I said my grandparents were not fighters, not by nature, and it didn't come naturally to them. Shlomo, my grandfather, taught school. He drove the ambulance wagon. My bubby worked with Dr. Hirsch in the infirmary. We know at the time that there were forced marriages or young men and women who would connect with each other in the woods. There were unplanned pregnancies. Obviously, a newborn in the camp would have been devastating, would have given, not just health-wise and medically, but potentially give the location of the camp away to the Germans. You couldn't have babies in the camp. And so my grandmother recalls helping perform abortions for the desperate women in the forest who actually requested them. So just a few other pictures that I wanted to share here. This line, I'd rather save one old Jewish woman than kill 10 Nazis, really informed my grandparents' lives, actually, because my grandmother obviously wouldn't have, she was not a fighter, neither of them would have been part of any other Bielski, any other partisan brigade. And so they owe their lives, and the rest of our families owe our lives to that. So at the reunion, which was just this like amazing space to be standing in a place that they had all been. This is my cousin Andrea, this is me, my mom, this is my mother's twin brother Jaime, this is my other cousin Lauren, and so we were all able to gather together and be in this place. We reconnected with some other cousins. These are Kushners that we rarely get to see in the forest. We were just sharing this partisan lunch that was organized by Tamara, and the museum was just this real celebration of the stories and memories. We were able to toast them all together. This is my uncle and my mom with Aaron Bell and his wife at the reunion, which is also a remarkable experience to see the surviving Bielski brothers. So today we really take it very seriously, this idea of bearing witness. My grandparents, this is a picture of them. They ended up in a displaced persons camp in Italy, as Tamara said in the introduction, Ascoli Piceno near Castel Gandolfo. My grandfather actually worked in the Judaica section at the Vatican Library when they were there. My mom and my uncle, twins, were born to them in the displaced persons camp, and they were there until they were 5 years old. And although we think of a refugee camp as not being a very hospitable place, you know, definitely there were challenges. And of course, they were grieving the losses of everyone else that they'd known. It was a joyful time for them to begin this family. They were able to come to Canada. My grandfather was involved in helping get people into what was then the Mandate of Palestine, British occupied region before the creation of the State of Israel. But my grandmother had had enough of war and she just refused to go. So they were able to come to Canada, which is where many of us live now. They lived and died here. I live here with our family and my mom. A lot of our family lives in the US, in New York and Boston and Connecticut. This is from the refugee camp, I guess, children's field trip. This is my mother and my uncle, and they were babies. Taken out. This is a picture when they came to Canada at my uncle's bar mitzvah. This is my uncle Jaime, this is my mom, this is my grandfather and my babi. And these were people who were from the Bielski brigade who were able to join the bar mitzvah. I mean, this would have been, I guess, in the mid-50s. So to be able to gather together to celebrate really was quite a remarkable thing. This is also a picture from the bar mitzvah of their family at the time. And some others who were able to come and join them, including my great uncle. This was a picture of my grandparents. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to just go back to that one. Visiting with the Bielskis in Israel. This is my baby over here, and this is my Zadie. It's not a great image, but it's just still from a film. So to be able to be part of that reunion. My grandfather, as I said, was a principal at a Jewish school, Herzliya. He's in the back there, and to continue teaching about what happened in the Second World War, but also and during the Shoah, but also to carry on Hebrew teaching and learning. My uncle has 3 kids who went on to have grandchildren. My brother and I have 6 kids between us. So this is all of the great grandchildren of the 2 people, my baby and my Zadie. This is from a number of years ago. They've all grown up quite a bit since then. So their legacy really continues, and we take that very seriously. One of the things that our family has taken quite to heart is the idea of documenting Jewish resistance, that there's so many stories, some that we know, many that will never ever be told, and how important this is. And, you know, of my 3 daughters, I really feel like this has impacted them. They're young adults now. One of them, Sophie, was named after my Zadie Shelub, and she has gone on to be an engineer, just like he could create anything, you know, with a piece of wood. And you know, whatever he had lying around, he really kept that. And so I feel like he kind of motivated her. My daughter, Alex, has gone on to study trauma and clinical psychology. She's going to be starting at Harvard this year. And the idea of how trauma transcends generations is very interesting to her. And my youngest daughter is going to be starting in the Peace, Conflict, and Social Justice Center at the University of Toronto next year. So we really feel that although generational trauma is real and palpable and important, we also need to think about generational strengths. And I feel that my grandparents really passed this legacy on to us, as a grandchild, but also onto their great grandchildren. So that's it.
Thank you, Alissa, for this very, very emotional and very strong presentation. I learned several things from you. Thank you very much. I will later write to you and ask for more details.
Okay.
And now I will ask Shifra to introduce our next speaker and kindly ask you to keep to the schedule. 10 minutes, please.
So hello everyone. I have the great pleasure of introducing tonight Jack and what appears to be Lynn and another friend, I'm assuming a son, who will be joining us this evening. I had the pleasure of meeting Jack and Lynn just recently as they were visiting here in Israel. Jack was born and grew up in Melbourne, Australia. He is 71 years old, and he and an older sister were born in Turin, Italy in 1947 in a displacement camp. Jack is married to Lynn. They have 3 children and 6 grandchildren. His parents, Judy and Velvel, survived the Shoah with the Bielski partisans. They were separated twice, and they truly have this incredible story of finding each other after the war. It was passed down to their children and to their grandchildren. Jack has always been interested in their survival and has now translated and described their story into a book that he has so graciously shared with the Together Plan. So please, Jack, tell us their story.
Thank you very much. Hi, before I actually start, I just watched the presentation by Alissa, and I think that we are actually cousins, and more of that will come out later.
Wow, that'd be amazing.
It's a small world.
Indeed.
My name's Jack Borowski, and my parents, Judy and Velvel, survived the Shoah with the Bielski partisans. Velvel was born in Zhelachov, Poland, and moved with his family to Novogrudok in 1930. Judy was born in Karelich, a small village near Novogrudok, and her maiden name was Berkovich. They married in December 1940, before the Nazis occupied Novogrudok. Velvel was 25 and Judy 23. They were both tailors. My mother escaped the ghetto on the 22nd of December 1942 with 17 others. Both Judy and Velvel planned to escape together. However, after Judy was out, Velvel froze with fear and was unable to escape. Judy and the others reached the forest, and after a few days, partisans came for them and took them to the Bielskis. Mum often told us the story of her first meeting with Tuvia. She was short and very frightened. Tuvia came up to her riding a white horse. He got off and put his arm around her and said, "Do not worry, with me you will be safe." Our whole family was very thrilled to see Daniel Craig in Defiance riding a white horse. Judy lived in a semi-dugout hut with 15 other people on a wooden platform covered with straw. Their living conditions were very basic. Later, she lived with her 2 brothers and sisters. Judy described living in the forest in her own words, and I'll quote her from the book I've just done. My brothers, Chaim and Yossel, came to the Bielskis later, and we were in a hut together. In the partisan camp, men, including Chaim and Yossel, went looking for food in groups of 10 every day. The food parties brought back potatoes, bread, and a whole cow. In the beginning, when we had no experience, we took a slaughtered animal straight from a Goyim farm, but the blood was still dripping and left a trail in the snow. The Germans followed it and attacked us. We cooked in a big kitchen. No one stole food, but those working in the kitchen may have taken a slightly larger piece of meat. While there was bread and potatoes, there was enough for everyone to eat. My brother Chaim was very clever and capable. He made an oven in our hut in which we could bake bread. We were always together. I saw Tuvia Bielski a lot. He was our rescuer, our messiah. I remember him telling us that we must live through this together. The camp was very well organised. We had clothing, boots and shoes. There was a washing line where we hung our clothes, and once a week we washed all our clothes in a big pot. There was a doctor in the camp. Velvel was with me when I had an abortion. There was a severe typhus outbreak, and Irvin and Sharon were sick, but I missed Velvel and me. Another of the stories that Mum told us was when she was escaping from the Germans during Operation Herman. They had to go through a deep swamp up to her neck in water. She always proudly told us that she never even caught a cold. Velvel escaped the Novogrudok ghetto on the 26th of September 1943 through the tunnel. He was with his brother Irvin and sister Sharon. They reached the forest and eventually got to the Bielski camp. After 9 months of separation, Judy and Velvel were reunited. I will now read part of his testimonial. I start to be in this remarkable camp, Jewish partisan group, was a miracle. It gave us back our dignity and hope. Although we were fearful of German attacks, we lived as free people in control of our own lives. I started looking for Judy, but could not find her when I arrived. She was in a separate encampment with her brothers and sisters away from the Bielskis. They took me there and I saw it was a dangerous area to stay. Shortly afterwards, we all moved to the Bielski camp. I worked as a tailor with the partisans. I was always a tailor. Often I traded my work for extra food as a method of payment. We also worked for the Russian partisan groups in the forest. We had a leather tannery, and we repaired firearms and made boots and horse saddles. We supplied the other partisans and they paid in product. There was a typhus epidemic in the forest, and the partisans quarantined an area about 1 kilometre away. Shaindl and Irvin and hundreds of others were sick. Other partisan groups brought their sick to us. Only one person died. The forest base of the Bielski partisans developed into a little town with semi-subterranean dugout rooms housing a bakery, a salami factory, shoe, tailoring and engineering workshops, and later a tannery. Partisans from all over the region came to the Bielski camp to repair their guns, shoes and uniforms and exchange flour for bread and cows for salami. I worked as a tailor, a trade I excelled in. Many of the men had firearms and fought the Germans in guerrilla-style warfare. I also went out on missions to get food from the surrounding army. The Russians liberated them on the 16th of June 1944. Velvel was conscripted into the Russian army. Again, he was a tailor, and in 1946, he ended up in Vladivostok. Meanwhile, Judy went with her brothers and sisters and eventually reached a DP camp in Turin called Grugliasco, Italy. Mum's younger brother, Yossel, or Joe, married Ray Kushner in Budapest en route to Italy. Ray, together with her sister and father, escaped through the tunnel with Velvel, and they were all together in the forest. Joe changed his name from Berkovich to Kushner in Italy so that they could all travel to the US as a family unit. Velvel was released from the Russian army in 1946 and made his way from Vladivostok to Turin to be reunited with Mum for a second time. They were separated for over 18 months. His journey is another story. In conclusion, Judy was one of 8 children, of which 5 survived. Velvel was also one of 8 children, of which 4 survived. Because of the Bielskis, these 9 came out of the Noloboki forest, and now there are over 270 descendants. Am Yisrael Chai.
Thank you very much for telling the story of your parents and for being very precise and fitting into the time. Brilliant, excellent. Thank you very much. And I know David has a very good presentation, which I hope you will send or upload to our story bank with the Together Plan.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And one more speaker, Cohen, as people know her. She's the daughter of a tunnel survivor and until last year, the oldest living Bielski partisan. Her mother, Fanny Borowski, died last year in Jerusalem at the age of close to 101. Doctor of Clinical Social Work since 2007, she has been occupied with the story of the tunnel escape and the Bielski partisans since she first visited Novogrudok in 2007. She has recently completed a book called Tunnel of Hope, Escape from the Novogrudok Forced Labor Camp, for which Professor Yehuda Bauer has written a foreword. But he has proven that the tunnel escape was the most successful prisoner escape of the Holocaust and of World War II through a hand-dug tunnel, as well as one of the most successful, if not the most successful escape of the Holocaust. In her book, Batya posits that the tunnel escape would have never happened if not for the existence of the Bielskis, who gave them hope for survival. If only escapees could find them in the forest. She knows that her mother would have never survived without them, that Batya herself, thousands of other descendants of Bielski partisans, living today, owe their lives to the Bielskis as well. With great pleasure, I am giving the floor to Batya Cohen, who has been my friend for the last 15 years.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, everybody. In my upcoming book, Tunnel of Hope, I have a chapter called The Bielski Detachment, The Address of Hope. I gave the title name after I heard Jack Hagen one of the escapees, refer to the escape from the labor camp when he said everybody was ready to escape because they had an address to go to. I'm totally convinced that if not for the hope and vision provided by the Bielskis, 128 tunnel survivors, at least 128 that I've identified, would not have survived. While the vast majority of tunnel survivors joined the Bielski detachment, some eventually did join other partisan units, but the aim of all the tunnel inmates was to get to the forest to join the one place they were guaranteed shelter and safety, the Bielski Atrium. Had the Bielski detachment not have existed, I'm convinced there never would have been a tunnel escape. My mother, Fanny Dunitz-Brodsky, would not have survived the war, and I would not have been born. It was the hope offered by the Bielski partisans that while still in the labor camp, my mother refused to escape when offered the opportunity to do so. In May 1943, she was approached by Joseph Varzan, one of the local camp guards. Varzan, who had known of her family in Jettel before the war, had offered her the priceless opportunity to flee with one other person of her choice. Fearing that neither she nor her younger brother Motel could successfully navigate the way to the Bielskis because they were not from there, they were from Jettel, she requested that they be joined by a Novogrudok native who was familiar with the terrain. When Varzan refused, saying he could not allow more than 2 people out, Fanya, my mother, made the supreme sacrifice in choosing one such native to take her place and lead Motel to the safety of Bielskis. Because reaching the Bielskis meant surviving, and because she so much wanted her brother to survive more than she wanted for herself, she arranged for him to go in her stead. After my mother's successful escape through the tunnel, her journey was guided by a hand extended to her in the darkness by another escapee named Henya Yarmovsky. Henya was a Novogrudok native and the mother of Fanya's friend and murdered classmate, Sonia. Henya's family had owned a flour mill before the war, and she knew many of the native farmers who would come to grind their wheat. And she led my mother to a non-Jew that she knew, and this family and her family sheltered my mother and Henya overnight. And one of the few Holocaust stories that I heard growing up, I didn't even know about the tunnel till I was in my 30s, was that she was taken to the home. They were Baptist Baptist farmers, and they gave her and Chenya a whole chicken and a pillow with a white pillowcase. That was the extent until I was much older of what I knew of her experiences. Anyway, Chenya's daughter Tal, I was hoping she'd be here, but I don't see her. She lives in Tel Aviv, and a few years ago, there was a very emotional reunion in my Jerusalem home between my mother and Chenya's granddaughter Tal. Due to Tuvya's insistence, no Jew was turned away from his detachment. He admitted everyone without exception, the young, the old, men, women, children, the sick and the weak, those with weapons and those without. Throughout the years of Tuvya's leadership, danger and shortage of supplies found resistance among the fighters in having to care for the malbushim, as they call them, or unarmed partisans. My mother, one such malbush among the tunnel survivors, often spoke with pride that she never attached herself to a man in order to survive, as did many of the other single women. In the course of my research, I heard from other former Bielski partisans that as an unmarried woman bereft of a man to protect her and bring back provisions from hunting expeditions, my fiercely independent mother had a very, very hard time alone in the forest, but she nevertheless managed to survive through the kindness of others. Assigned the role of a nurse, she trained as a teacher, didn't know anything about nursing, but nevertheless, she, quote unquote, treated patients without any supplies or medicine. And until she herself eventually contracted typhus. And I know that Alissa's grandfather transported patients in his ambulance, which was a cart and a horse. And I imagine he transported her as well. She remained in the Zemblanka, the hut which served as a hospital, alone and comatose for 6 weeks. But she always remembered the kindness of the partisan Luba Greitzer from Zettel, as well as that of Chaya Bielski, Zeus's wife and Asela's mother, both of whom would visit her while standing near an opening from the outside of the Zemblanka and leave her a few morsels of food. I see Sai Wodoko. Hi, Sai. Who's the son of Rosa Gershinovsky Wodoko. Rosa was a tunnel survivor from Karelich. Her sister Batya was murdered after exiting the tunnel. Rosa and her mother Sarah succeeded in reaching the forest, where both became Bielski partisans. In one of my very, very first interviews before her death, I interviewed her about 6 years before her death in 2018. Rosa shared one of her fond memories of the forest, a memory from the time when she was stricken with typhus together with my mother. The two women, both of whom had lost their hair from the disease, would walk to the edge of the detachment, where they would discreetly expose their bald heads to the sunlight. I want to show a photo of my mother taken after liberation, where her hair is, it's the first photo. Her hair is covered, still covered with a kerchief. As we can see, it's starting to grow out, but she still felt bald. The second photo is what she looked like in about 1946. Photo was taken in a DP camp in Germany. After coming to the United States in 1949, in 2008, at the age of 88, an age when most people slow down, My mother immigrated to Israel, her fourth country of residence. Here, she attended Hebrew classes and enjoyed meeting members of the second and third generations and telling them about their parents' experiences in the labor camp and in the Bielski partisans. Until the end of her life, in June of 2021, at the age of 100 and a half, a little more, she continued to refer to herself as a partisan. So it's only fitting that just by accident, but I don't think it's an accident, she's buried just meters away from her commander, Tuvia Bielski. And I always go to his grave on the way to my mother. And on my mother's grave, I put a stone that I brought back from the Novogrudok forest, and inscribed on her tombstone are the words "Eternal Partisan." Thank you.
Thank you, Batya. Fania was really a very independent character. She was a character, and her story in the partisans is very special, really, because she was one of the few who didn't get married in the forest. Very few didn't get married. Well, we still have some time for questions, and I hope that Artur will now take everything into his hands and will manage Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Tamara. I suggest that we work the following way. Who's got the question, please put it in chat and I will read them out and I'll refer them to the people that you want to ask the questions. I mean, we haven't got that much time, so we've got 15 minutes to have our Q&A session. And it would be much easier to have the questions in the chat, unless you have a comment or you want to say something for everyone and it's not the question. So please do put your questions in the chat if you've got them. Otherwise, I can try to look for the raised hands if someone wants to make a general comment to everyone.
I would like to make, I unmuted myself, Tamara.
I can't see
Yes,
who
please.
is
I don't know if I can be heard or not. This is, may I make a comment, author?
Yes, please. I just didn't see because I
Tamara,
can't see
can you hear
everyone on
me?
the screen. Yeah.
Yes, Bella, please.
Okay.
This is Bella Rubin.
My name is Bella. I'm the daughter of Taiba Bielski, the younger sister of Tuvia. And I wanted to thank all of the speakers tonight for their wonderful, all kinds of information that I actually didn't know about. And also corroborated all kinds of things about my mother that I always thought were true, might be true, but were not corroborated. For example, I believe she also had an abortion in the forest. And I know that many other women did as well, and that was relayed by one of the speakers. I just wanted to thank all of you for providing all these accolades for the Bielskis. I mean, I grew up hearing the stories from age 0. So, but of course, they didn't have the kind of meaning that they have today for me. So I wanted to thank you for adding to some of the information that have been corroborated by your stories, your very meaningful stories. Thank you.
Thank you.
And hello to my sister who's watching, Charlotte, the only one who was born in America. Our mother used to say, Charlotte, you're the only true American, because each of us was born in a different country.
Thank you, Bella.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else has a comment? Please raise your hand so I can unmute you. I'm just surfing through different screens just to make sure I get everyone. Any comments? any questions, please feel free. Ze'ev, yeah, I can see your hand, not the virtual one, but the real one, but I'm unmuting you. Can you unmute yourself? I can't unmute you. Yes.
Will
it be all right if I put a picture of Gedalia Tucker, which I did not do during my speech because I was short. I felt that I'm short and I'm not getting into the 10-minute time limit. Is it okay?
Yes.
So I have to do share screen.
Yes, just a second.
Sorry. Not to.
Okay.
Do you see this picture?
Yes, we can
Yes.
see. Yes.
So this is him. This is the village where we lived. Where my parents lived, Kaminka. It was taken during. These are my parents who married after the war. And this is Gedalia with the sister of my mother. My mother had one sister. There were two daughters, and I never met them. They were not allowed to come to Israel, even though they asked for. There is a story behind it, which I don't feel that I am allowed to tell it, but there is a story behind, which is concerning the partisan time after the war. Something happened after the war. And this is me on the site of Zeludok, reading Kaddish. And that's part of a book that I guess some people know. It's paintings only, drawings. And this one says that when we arrived, we crossed the river, we arrived to the partisans, and I asked from Zusia, the brother of Bielski, so it's written, to join. It's Pavel, sorry, I forgot his surname. Yeah, good. We call him in Hebrew Peretz Chorashti, but okay, that's his name in Israel. And that's Olchovka on the Naaman River, which goes like there. And this is the grave of Tucker in Shchuchin. Shchuchin is near Kaminka, not too far from Grodno in Belarus. And thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to go into the chat. A message from Judy. Thank you so much to all the speakers. Your stories of a family survival were informative and touching. From Sylvie, to everyone, a stunning program. Thank you. Thank you, Sylvie. Anyone else has a comment or anything to want to say? I can't see you. If you could just, yes,
Even
okay, Irwin, I can
Shalu.
see you. Hold on. Can you please? There is an option of raising a virtual hand. I mean, I can't really look at everyone when you're raising your own hand. So there's an option on Zoom where you can have the virtual hand. I can see Polotsk from Belarus has raised the virtual hand. Sasha,
and the real one as well.
both. Okay, you get the 10 points. Okay, you've got 2 hands up.
Thank you. Hello from Polotsk. It is in the north on Belarus, and I just would like to say thanks to Debra, Tamara, Artur, and Shifra. Your mission is literally vital. You're like constructing bridges between generations, countries, between people. And surely I would like to say thanks to all the speakers. These stories are so touching and vibrant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you, Sasha.
Irwin's got a comment or a question, and Nadia and Brian next. Irvin,
evening.
welcome.
Speaking to you from Netanya, where we made Aliyah some 6 years ago. My surname is Lebetkin, and my cousin Selwyn has been doing a lot of family research and been in contact with Tamara. And it's through her and through the research that we've done that we have discovered that we had a great uncle who we knew nothing about, who had served with the Bielski brothers and had died with the Levinskaya brigade, which has been mentioned tonight. And hearing some of the comments that have been made of people who have got records, maybe they can find lists of names who fought, and because one great uncle lived and survived, and we don't know what he did or how he survived. All we know is that his family was murdered in 1942, and then he turned up in Cremona camp in Italy in 1946. And the period in between, we know nothing about. We'd like to find out. But I'd just like to add a little story, a little coincidence of this past week. When on Yom HaShoah, there was a talk given by the son of, well, his mother had survived the Vilna ghetto. She had got out of the Vilna ghetto and spent 3 years hidden in a barn. And he spoke for half an hour or so, telling us of his mother's story of survival. At the end of his talk, he said when she survived and got to a camp, she married her father, who had also survived, and he had been a chef in the Bielski camps. And it just came out of nowhere. I will try and get it to the speaker and get him to make contact with you so that maybe his list and his information about his father can be recorded with all the work that you, Tamara, are doing. Thank you.
Yes, please do put us in contact with him. It's very interesting.
Thank you. Irwin?
Arthur, I would like to just tell everybody that the spirit and the love and the commitment of the Bielskis to their partisan members and the partisan members to the Bielskis never ended. In 1964, at the New York World's Fair in Flushing Meadows, my father took my mother and his young children, I was age 16, to come to the World's Fair. And there we met with Zush Bielski and his wife Sonia. And there they commemorated all the events of all their times together and their collaborations as commanders in the Ordzhonikidze. And 2 days later, we went to Brooklyn and there was a wonderful party. And at that party, so many of the survivors, so many of the Bielski partisan descendants raised Zush and raised Nochem, their commanders, on chairs and marched around the room in celebration that they gave them life and they had triumphed. And that should be known, that it didn't end with liberation, that it never ends, that it continues. And today is an example of that continuation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I got a comment from Susan Bach. In each of these programs, I have learned something new. What a remarkable resource and connection to people who I feel are like family through our shared heritage. Thank you. Thank you, Susan. And I do think that, I know Sylvie has raised her hand. I just want to say that Sylvie is going to be the last one. And we've been over 2 hours. And I just hope that we can save our comments and save our questions for our next session, which we'll let you know when it's going to happen. Because otherwise we're going to say everything now. But let's save some more good stories and good comments and questions for the next one. Sylvie, you're welcome to comment.
I just want to say that I know very well how difficult it is to dig into one's past or into family ancestries and to come up with these stories. It is not easy. It is a sacrifice, actually. Sometimes it leaves an aftermath of thoughts that you thought you never had to think about it again, but it brings back the past. But this courage that these people, these presenters have done and the work that they have done to keep the story alive, I am very grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvie. I'm going to give my floor to Debra to close our session. Debra?
So I was going to share my screen again with the big thing saying share your story, be in touch, subscribe to our newsletter, but I'd handed the host over to Artur, so don't worry about it. I've now said what I wanted to say. I'd like to thank you all for being here. I think it's been an incredibly powerful 2 hours. There is so much more to say. This is not the end. This is very much the beginning. I'd like to echo what Irwin has said, that in fact, I've written it down, the commitment, it didn't all end at liberation, that it continued. And I feel very privileged that we are able to continue with this commitment, because there's still a lot of work to be done. And it involves all of you. And you are all now part of this journey. We will be sending out more information shortly because we have some exciting next step developments involving Shifra Pupko, who is based in Israel, with part of this very important team, which are all part of this important team. So I would just like to say thank you to my team, to Artur, to Tamara, always for her amazing work, to Shifra, for all of you for being here, to all of you for sharing your stories, those who have already shared them. And if you haven't, please send us your stories. It's really important. And I'd just like to say, wherever you are, whatever time it is in the day, have a wonderful rest of your day. Be well, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Debra.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you for the feeling of being a family again. Thank you.
Thank you.
With new members this time. Yeah.
Hello.
Love and gratitude.
I knew you were going to call. Thank you. And if you hadn't, I would have called you. So
I will be in touch with everybody.
No, I only found out later. Maybe I was asleep when you called, evidently.
Tamara, you've done a great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Larissa. Thank you.
Thank you, Larissa.
I didn't tell
Great
you
people. Great people. That's why. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Too emotional.
Hi, Robert.
Hi there.
I feel so close to all of you that I really feel that you are family. And I'm finding that even though the program is over, I don't want to hang up. I don't want to push that button that says end.
Susan, I was just about to try to message you, but because I handed host back to Artur, I couldn't message you. But just to say, I used to live in Durham, North Carolina as well.
You're kidding.
No.
Well, you'll have to come back to visit.
I am planning to, don't worry. So
well, we would love to entertain you.
Thank you. I look forward to that, and I will email you.